question that I'd like to ask the room today is, are we in a mobile echo chamber, mobile innovation echo chamber? So in other words, have we become so self-congratulatory about the success or lack of success of certain tools that we forget what the point is? The question isn't necessarily what tool to use, but why we should use the tool to begin with, and if in fact a tool is the solution for the problem that we have. So I wanted to look at a particular tool that's very popular in the mobile space, very effective. Sometimes in in the center, you see that tool is Ushahidi, a very popular mapping tool, interactive map. And what you see around the outside is in these big boxes, you see the players who tend to use these tools. And one of the more interesting things to me is all the things that are going on inside those relationships, like all the players that we tend to forget about in all of this. And the relationships they have with each other, and the relationships that they have to the tools, and the motivations behind them. So I find it really interesting to look at this through a different lens, as opposed to just looking at the veneer of a product that provides a different perspective. Everyone wants mobile apps. Everyone in the global development space is looking for mobile apps and mobile solutions. And sometimes the foresight of asking why and what for hasn't been asked. So I think that we can start to solve this by asking different questions than what tools to use. And the first of those questions is, in my opinion, is it sustainable locally? Is it a local solution? And does it work in which the environment that it's going to be used? To give you an example from my own background, my company Appfrica takes a look at this from the perspective of local entrepreneurship. We work with and local staffing. So we work with local software developers, and we essentially matchmake with organizations that want to do software development or other types of projects using local talent. And we do this because it's very important to focus on, as part of that sustainability loop, to actually build the skills that make those things sustainable. And the way you build skills is through experience. So you can't just expect the whole region to adopt these high-tech solutions and technologies overnight if they aren't involved in the creation. The other is to build awareness. We work with these guys to just make them more aware of technology and help them through creating environments for collaboration, peer-to-peer learning, and so on. And then finally, with local entrepreneurs, investing, and I don't just mean putting money in, I mean investing time, energy, and other things, other resources that they need to pursue the given path. And the difference between this approach and some of the other approaches I can take is a sense of ownership over not just the tool, but the project and what the mission of the project. So the next slide, which you saw briefly, is all the top-level domain names of the African continent. And what's interesting about this to me is that only about 20 out of 54 are actually owned by the countries that they are used to represent. Which means that the rest are held by private companies in many other parts of the world. And what that means is no jobs are being created locally. The country doesn't really represent itself on the web, and there's no sense of ownership when it comes to producing content for the web. So the second big question, so I was going through some bullet points there. The second big question as it relates to mobile tools and the deployment of those tools would be to consider the context. Has the context, the environment in which it's being deployed been considered? And so what I mean by this is the environment, the resources that are already there, and can they be included in the process? To use another example, I worked with a woman named Rose Schumann for several years on a project called Question Box. And the idea behind Question Box was to create a feedback loop where people in very rural parts of the African continent could call into a central number and ask a question in it about any subject and get back the answer. And the exciting part about this was that people could engage the operator. They call, they get to know the operators, they learn the voice. And they participated more in consuming information because it was coming through a channel that had considered the context, which was their local dialect. So they didn't necessarily have to speak English. They could call in and speak whatever rural dialect that they were familiar with. And the thing that Question Box had done to consider the context was find people who spoke those local languages to engage them. Go a bit further on that project, one of the things that happens, I think, in other mobile projects is that SMS is very heavily relied upon in regions of the world where people are illiterate. And so much of that content goes unconsumed just because in the context of the environment, it's not relevant. If you can't read, you're not going to read an SMS. Looking at voice-based solutions and lingual solutions, locally lingual solutions, sometimes makes sense. And then the other thing that is worth noting, the third, is looking at supporting an environment where production is just as important as consumption. So there's this whole concept of pushing content out to developing countries so that they can learn more and improve and do all these things. There's less focus on the actual production, the engagement of their production of things that we might learn from. And I think it's important to include that as part of the greater discussion. So there's another project that I've been involved with called Apps for Africa. We started this in 2010, and it was a contest that was very small. It started in East Africa and grew a bit last year to include 15 countries across East, West, and the Southern African region. And Apps for Africa is a contest that encourages local entrepreneurs, African entrepreneurs, to develop solutions that solve their problems. So African solutions to African problems, using technology. And so to make this happen, we have to encourage discussion, because software developers in and of themselves aren't necessarily aware of the problems that can be solved through technology that affect society. Likewise, the governments, local governments, aren't necessarily aware of what can be accomplished with technology. And local civil society and individuals in the public aren't necessarily aware. So we create these discussion spaces, much like this, where people come and they share ideas, actually a little bit more interactive than this, where people come, share ideas, and they discuss the subjects that are afflicting them. And people can get ideas, they can share, they can learn from each other. And what happens, what the outcome is teams go away with ideas for projects that they then work on to compete in this Pan-African competition. And this year, these are some quick numbers about the competition. So there was over 250 apps, over 32 mentors, people working with those teams who were submitting applications. Over 20 events held in 15 countries for nearly 2,000 people. And we gave away $75,000 to those projects. We consider it, it's unrestricted, so it's not really, it doesn't really take the form of anything other than a prize. Some of them have chosen to use that to seed companies. Others have chosen to use that to as more of a grant type thing. So it's really up to the entrepreneur, or up to the developer, or the team. But supporting the producer financially allows them to focus and allows them to scale the solution that they are working on. And then just another, it really irrelevant number, the number of Google results. But so I just wanted to highlight a few examples from my own history when it comes to mobile development, because it's really important to not just consider the effects of the tools that we are building, but the effects throughout society, the impacts. What are we accomplishing? And both before and after the tool is deployed. In the case of many of these projects, the effects are not exactly obvious. Creating jobs locally has a huge impact in the long term, although it may seem like a short impact up front. Encouraging creativity and collaboration may seem like it isn't going to affect local society in the way that it does. What it does do is it gets people there encouraged by what they can accomplish through the technologies that they have access to using, making, and wielding. And so I think as we move forward in this space, it's important to just consider the greater context of everything and look at ways in which we can engage and collaborate in a more participatory way, not necessarily through participatory tools.